Okay, welcome. I'm Lauren Barker. I'm the CEO of Cape Cod Young Professionals, and we're here with our latest series of CCYP's Shaping the Cape video podcast. And I'm joined by three wonderful guests today to talk about childcare and childcare policy on the Cape and beyond. So I'm very excited to welcome our guests. We first have Nola Glatzel. Welcome, Nola. You want to tell us a little bit about you and your business to start off with?
Sure. My name is Nola Glatzel, as Lauren said, and I opened a family child care center called Earthstar Play School in Truro. I opened it last fall, in fall 2019. So in March, along with many other programs, I had to close, which I wasn't expecting. And before that, I actually grew up in Provincetown. I went to Provincetown Elementary School, and I worked as a public school teacher in New York City for 5 years before deciding to move back to Cape Cod. I ran the after school program for Churo's school for a year, and then I opened my own program. And I was really motivated to do that just because there is such a great need for childcare in the Outer Cape right now. And I'm really happy to be here, so thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nola. And Nola's going to bring the perspective, I think, having grown up on the Cape and left and come back, that's one angle that you can bring to this conversation, as well as being a childcare business owner, both during this time now with in the context of COVID-19 and everything that we've been facing with those closures. But even prior to that, as you mentioned, childcare was such a dire need here on the Cape, especially on the Outer Cape. So thanks for joining us.
Sure.
And then next we have Stacie Peugh of the YMCA Cape Cod. Welcome, Stacey. Can you tell us a little bit about you?
Thanks, Lauren. So I'm the president and CEO at the YMCA Cape Cod, and I've been with this local Y for 10 years this year and 30 years with the Y, and came up through childcare. It was actually my early background working in the Y and summer camp programs and being a junior camp counselor and teaching in classrooms and just kind of working my way up to 10 years ago becoming the CEO here on the Cape, and super passionate about childcare. It's my roots, and education is my roots. I was going to become a public school teacher, and the Y stole me away from that. So everything around early education and education for children during school hours and out of school time, all the way through to graduation. It's really important to the mission work of the Y, and youth development being our primary focus. It's just such a privilege to be in this role and be able to have such a broad sweeping impact, cradle to grave, we say.
Yeah, and the Y is making a lot of changes and really evolving more in that childcare side of things. And so I hope that we'll get into that a little bit as well. And last but definitely not least, we have Suzanne Scallion, the Superintendent of Provincetown Schools. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you, Lauren. And hi to Nola, former Provincetown student. I love that. And Stacey. So yes, I started last fall as Superintendent of Provincetown Schools. And by way of having grown up on Cape Cod and then teaching and coaching for many years at Barnstable and Sandwich, my name at the time was Erickson. Then spent a number of years out in California on the West Coast before returning home, where I was a superintendent in Western Mass, and was very involved and passionate about out of school time. Stacey, I'm glad you brought that up. So I inherited a remarkable program, and I really need to take my hat off to the visionaries that launched the early program here in the 90s that was a preschool, an integrated preschool. It evolved into a full day program, and it has since evolved into a remarkable program that is funded by the town. I think it may be the first in the state. So we bring in infants, and we have an infant program. We have, in fact, next year we'll have 2 toddler classes, a toddler program, a preschool program, a pre-K program that feeds into our kindergarten. And the beauty of the program is that if you work for the town of Provincetown, it's free. And as you know, the cost for comprehensive childcare is probably $20,000 a year in some cases, maybe more. If you are a resident, the program is free based on available space. And if you're a non-resident and we have space, it is fee-based. And we run all year, we run year-round. Of course, we closed along with NOLA and many other programs across the Commonwealth. We're a little bit unusual. We're not under the umbrella of EEC, but we're under DESE. We're under the Department of Education. So we're a very unusual program. I think one that other towns and cities in the Commonwealth are looking at. I've had several calls over the course of the year from folks that want to come visit and learn more. And we just love what's happening. It's the best part of my day when I get up to the, I'll reveal my bias, the infant room. But all little people are great. Even 8th grade little people are great. We go from infant to 8th grade at the moment in Provincetown. So anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and I'm delighted to be here today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for joining us. And you and I connected because our Public Policy Committee here at CCYP was actually very interested in the program. It is, as you mentioned, an extremely innovative, certainly the first on the Cape, if not the state, as you said, that's offering kind of the catchphrase is universal preschool, but essentially it's free of charge and really fills a gap need for childcare in those early years. So each of you are supporting the young families and young workers at the Cape through what you do in providing childcare options and very diverse types of childcare here on the Cape, from Falmouth in your case, Stacie, I know you're looking at that area through the YMCA all the way out to the Outer Cape. And so I do think it's important that we're showing that representation across the Cape in this conversation, because the needs vary really widely depending on where you are. But I think that the one thing that that we have found at CCYP as we delve further into this issue, it is one of the top 3 needs that we've identified for young people to live and work successfully here on the Cape. It is a largely unmet need for many families in the way that they might need childcare, or so duration of care or the cost of care can be a challenge. And in response to what we were finding with that great cost, Suzanne, you mentioned can be, that's not the high end, $20,000 a year. That's pretty typical for a single child, especially at the infant age. You're talking more than housing monthly costs for most families and caregivers. And so when we started to look at this issue, we really worked closely with partners in the childcare industry here on the Cape, looked at some of the research coming out of the state, and started to put together our own thoughts as CCYP on how our region can better support young workers and families to be able to stay here and make a life here. And we rolled out a childcare policy position paper that I want to refer back to as sort of a framework for this conversation, because I think each of you are meeting aspects of what we identified, and they're not new ideas or recommendations that we came up with. They're ones that we've looked at models like your programs and companies to look at those. So we'll talk about that as we go, but I think we'd be remiss to not talk about the elephant in the room of you said you're all closed currently. That clearly presents a whole other, and Stacie, you're not. So Stacie's got another aspect that we can touch on here with emergency childcare. What things are you seeing in your roles now, interfacing directly with the Cape's young families and children? You each kind of have a different aspect of this. So I'm really curious to know, how has COVID-19 and the resulting closures and everything that's going on impacted what you're seeing in your roles with children and families? So why don't we start with Stacie, because you are serving the emergency childcare needs as deemed by the governor's office. So let's start with you. Oh, you're muted. Got you.
Thank you. It's like tag, right?
No worries.
You know, you mentioned Governor Baker, and it has me thinking about, he gave a very special direct address just to emergency childcare providers just earlier this week. And it was incredibly thoughtful of him. And what he said in the beginning was that, you know, this pandemic has certainly turned so many things upside down throughout our world, but no more upside down than it really has for childcare. Just really how grateful he was when they created the emergency childcare option. He and Commissioner Sam were saying, is anybody going to even sign up to do this? Like, who's going to take the risk to do this? And so his message was one of gratefulness that we stepped up, and so many providers did across the state, because that's what we do. You know, we have to run into the battle when it comes to helping children and families. You know, children and families' lives don't stop because of a pandemic, and they need us. And I think, you know, this pandemic is certainly putting a very bright spotlight on the incredible need there is for childcare. And it's an essential service. And I just don't know that it has been recognized as that in my entire career. And I think that on the other side of this pandemic, and whatever that looks like, it's going to be a new day for what childcare looks like, the type of funding that it receives, the type of support that a broader sector of our political advocates, political leaders, everyone just really has a different appreciation for, and gives a stronger ear to and guidance for supporting. You know, I'm so thrilled, Suzanne, with what you're doing in Provincetown. I mean, this is what we need, is public funding, because it's essential. And birth to 5 years of age is just as critical as when children enter public school. And so that care it deserves taxpayer dollars. And I often talk about that, don't I, Lauren? About where's the March on Washington for taxpayer dollars for early education? But, you know, just to quickly answer the unprecedented question, things that are unprecedented and are interfacing directly with, you know, young families and children on the Cape. You know, ER childcare is just like nothing you've ever seen. So, you know, I forgot that I still had this on, but then I was like, you know what? Like, this is how we interact with children now. I mean, like, it's just, I mean, is that not unprecedented? How, you know, children being able to read facial expressions of each other, of their caregivers, the people around them that they interact with. There's so much learning that happens at that young age. And we're doing this not only with the children, but with families. So when the parents are driving up and they're dropping their children off, you know, they're like this, we're like this. I mean, talk about the worst kind of level of customer service, where we're just so familiar with greeting people with a smile. And this has taken away the smile. And we hope people can see that we're smiling with our eyes, but it's hard. It's really hard. So I think of little things like, you know, wearing a mask all the time. It's like just one major unprecedented thing that we've not had to deal with in interacting with children. How about free childcare? I mean, that is unprecedented as well. So, you know, here we are offering these 5 programs across the Cape, and nobody has to pay for it. I mean, they're not paying us enough to do it, so we're raising a ton of money to, you know, to fill in the blank. But the fact that the government said, you are not permitted to charge for this program, and we're going to pay you something to do it, it says again how essential childcare is, and that it deserves resources, and it can't fall on the burden of the families that have to work and have no other choice and no place to put their child. And, you know, I would say that probably the third thing I would highlight, third and more visible thing, is that we are seeing families we don't normally serve. So we typically might have working families that are in maybe what are considered the phase 2, the phase 3 reopening kinds of jobs. So it's been very interesting to see society decide what is an essential worker, and then how does that trickle down to the needs of children. And so we have a whole new set of families, and we don't know who to expect from one day to the next because it's dropping. So it could be anyone at any time. And that is just very different to have a new connection with new friends and new families and figure out how to adapt to that. You know, we are rule followers in the EEC world, and our staff are so used to the regulations of knowing everything about the child, you know, and always knowing, you know, kind of their little quirks and things because they've gotten to know them in the classroom. And maybe there's a new child today, but they get to know them pretty quickly. Well, every day it's different. And so I think that is also unprecedented. Running typically licensed programs under drop-in circumstances, which are unlicensed types of programs. So it's been a big challenge. And the last thing I would say about unprecedented is the invisible things that we are not seeing. And what I want to say about that is that we are not seeing how afraid people are. We see it because they're not sending their children to childcare. So what I would call underutilization of the free childcare has been astounding to me. Originally, we thought we would open up this childcare locations with 200 total slots in all 5 of our locations, and we were only going to open it for Cape Cod healthcare employees, because they did a survey and at least 180 families said they were going to need care. And we thought, oh my God, what are we going to do? How are we going to be able to serve the Cape, all essential workers? We have never tipped more than 25 children total across all 5 of our locations. And we just started to see those numbers this week, numbers in the 20s. So to me, what that says is what we are unable to see is the fear that people have and how they will solve this problem some other way that gives them a different level of comfort than to be in a group childcare setting.
Wow, that is really
Powerful.
think about. Thank you, Stacie. Lots to take away from that. Nola, you were in the process of opening up, is that correct? And COVID-19 hit. So, I mean, this has got to all be unprecedented for you. What kinds of things are you observing?
Yes, definitely unprecedented and unexpected, especially after going through the long process of becoming licensed. And I was able to open in September of last year. Yeah, it's unprecedented. I mean, I've been staying in touch with, I serve 7 families, 8 children, one of which is my niece. So I've been in touch with them the most, but there is a similarity across families, which is that families in which there are 2 parents working, but maybe they're not considered essential workers, they're working from home, are just having to figure out how to make this work when they're still working a full-time job. And I think that there hasn't been enough of a recognition of how hard that has been for families to negotiate who's working when. Are we going to be working after 6 p.m. or after 7 p.m. when the kids go to sleep? And making the choice of, well, maybe one parent will stop working and one parent will continue working. And I think that for some families that has been very gendered, which is unfortunate. So I've just been checking in with families, providing more at the beginning, a lot of videos of the songs that we would sing together, doing a couple of Zoom calls, and I have FaceTimes with the kids a lot because it was very surprising to be all together on Friday and then with no ability to explain what was happening to the children, it just being closed down. So I think for the first couple of weeks, I would get a lot of FaceTime calls just because kids, even at 2 and 3 years old, are saying like, I want to go to school. Like what's going on? And just not being able to have that understanding. I think now parents have gotten into a new rhythm, even if it's really hard, of just knowing how they're going to manage the days. And as Stacey was saying, and that was just really informative, Stacey, because I didn't know a lot of that. There is a fear, you know, just are we going to put our children back in a group setting when we're maybe not even having a dinner party with another family at this point? And now the state is talking about reopening. They put out the minimum requirements for reopening on Monday night. And on Tuesday morning, I had texts from parents like, when are you reopening? Are you reopening at the beginning of phase 2? Phase 2 is supposed to start June 8th. And just to have this feeling like I do want to serve the families. But it's going to take a lot of work to reopen with the requirements that they have set forth. So it's a challenging time. And it being my first year in this new type of education system, everything is unprecedented.
Yeah. I definitely want to reserve some time to talk about that reopening process, because I think, you know, you touched on some key points that we are seeing and hearing at CCYP, whether it's through the needs survey that we just completed or through our volunteer committees or any kind of interfacing that we're having with our community. If people are still working and are able to work from home and they have caregiving responsibilities of any kind, but particularly with children, it is really difficult to juggle, and there are some major mental health implications that are coming out of this that I think they're simmering below the surface right now. We're not seeing them because they're behind closed doors, but I think that it's going to really become a major issue, particularly as we enter this kind of gray area where, you know, some are open, some are not. It's down to individual business decisions. I know that virtually every summer camp is now canceled on the Cape, so you have that issue of school-age children and childcare now being completely removed for many families. So this is for several months more that we may be navigating all of this. So I want to turn to Suzanne and ask you the same question. What kinds of things are you seeing in your role right now?
So I think I would echo a lot of what Stacey and Nola offered, and that is fear, just fear of the unknown, fear of the known, and what's next. And we're also now managing the anxiety of staff about reopening. So we also received this document Monday night. It's daunting. The things that we need to do in terms of developing the plan, they're going to take us a couple of weeks just to develop a plan before the governor even suggests that we open our doors. But I think staff are afraid, and I think they feel a tremendous burden about keeping kids safe. And how do you keep a toddler at an appropriate social distance from another toddler? Temperature scans are great, but there are people that are asymptomatic that carry this virus, and nobody wants to bring it home to an elderly parent or grandparent. So I think it's very legitimate that people are afraid. We've seen an unprecedented creativity with our parents and families in terms of setting up safe childcare and quarantining with some special close friends. We reached out to some families when we got word that there was the reopening possibility, and we have a big push from the town employees who need to get back to work as town hall looks at phase 2 and phase 3. But I think even many of those employees are going to continue with the situations they have right now, and until there's a better treatment or a vaccine, because I think there was a lot of misinformation or unknown in the beginning of this, that kids were held harmless to this virus. And now we know that's not true, that for some kids, it can be really serious, and there's no profile of a child who will really struggle if they are infected. So we're dealing with family anxiety, we're dealing with staff anxiety. We're going to do our absolute best to keep everybody as safe as we can, but there are absolutely no guarantees. And so it's an overwhelming responsibility for our director, Edgar Miranda, who's diving deep into this as we speak. We'll work closely with our partners. We're watching numbers, Stacie, that we're getting from you, and we're going to do our very best to move forward, but we also encourage families to do what they think is the best for their children. And yes, there will be impacts. No matter what you decide, there are risks right now. I worry about older kids developing school anxiety about returning. So I think the social emotional impact of this is powerful. There's, we know there's a pervasive anxiety that we adults are carrying around as a result of this. I think there's just an enormous unknown, whether we're talking about young kids or older kids or the staff who work with them. So we're trying to manage all of that and move forward and keeping our fingers crossed for a vaccine. I think that's the best we can hope for.
Great. Well, I want to turn to that reopening, and you've all referenced it. And I think with the sort of scope and size of each of your programs, and there become, different challenges that you're facing. Stacie, you've got a program already in operation and will likely be, see, there's my dog, I told you. Will likely be reopening. We're all just humans here, right? Trying to do the best. She sees a squirrel or something. But, to have that parallel reopening with the existing program that you're running, Suzanne, you've got town constraints and sort of the aspect of dealing, with running a school program in addition to the early childhood program. In Nola, the size is small, but as you mentioned in the beginning, powerful because there's so little coverage when it comes to childcare needs being met on the Outer Cape. So what is this reopening? I know the guidelines just came out and in terms of phase 2 and what that will look like, but what are your preliminary thoughts about what this will look like for you and what challenges you may face with your operations? And why don't we start with Suzanne and go back?
Sure. So in some ways, this feels like a blueprint for school reopening as well. So I know a lot of superintendents across the Commonwealth are anxious to get their hands on it. Much of it is common sense. Much of it are the kinds of things we've heard about before. We also felt like a lot of it was in alignment with EEC standards as they are. So we're pulling out our policy manuals and trying to eliminate anything that's redundant with that so that we're really honing in on things specific to COVID and protecting kids. And we've already had a number of things happen. We have masks. We had a group of local women make masks specifically for 3-year-olds who can tolerate them with the wrap around the neck so that they can pull them down and not lose them. We've got other kinds of PPE for staff. We're working with our custodians on cleaning protocols. We've done a really intense cleaning of the building where our programs are. But we're clearly going to need more PD in terms of what needs to happen on a much more frequent basis. The town would like for us to extend our operating hours, but to do that, we're going to need additional custodial staff to get the cleaning done in time. A lot of it is about logistics of arrival, scanning, single points of entry, handoffs, and like Stacie was mentioning, masks. It's going to be very frightening for some kids. So we've urged parents, we sent a first round of masks home, and we've urged parents to start playing with them and wearing them and growing kids' comfort with them. I don't know how realistic it is to keep a mask on a preschooler, but we'll give it a shot. We have the luxury of being able to move kids into 2 separate areas, our toddlers. So that's really helpful. I mean, that we have physical space to keep them in the same group each day. I don't know how you're managing drop-ins. Our strategy is going to be to keep them in mini tribes or mini families, so they're never with different students or different adults, to reduce the risk of exposure. So there's just a million logistical pieces to be worked through. And so we're going to ask our staff to come in and take this a page at a time and make sure we're doing everything we can and that we have everything we need. So that's where we are.
You touched on such a critical piece too, because we know that kids, when they go to school and childcare, that the caregivers there are going to be dealing with a lot of the emotion that stems from all these unknowns and the changes that they're going to have to navigate. There's going to be a lot of grace that has to happen, I think, with the, with each other, and hopefully the parent caregiver community will band together to really keep the kids at the forefront of all that.
We need almost a different word, because reopening implies that it's business as usual. It's not going to be anything like what it was, and I think everybody has to recognize that. And we want to make sure that we're doing things that are developmentally appropriate to children, right? We don't want to accelerate their anxiety. We don't want to cause them to be fearful. But so it's not only the preparation of the building, it's the preparation of our own emotions to be better educators to these babies that are coming in, and these young kids. So
our biggest challenge as adults, right, is to get ourselves in order so that we can frame things up for children in ways that they can understand.
And buffer them from.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you have a date when you're planning to? No. Yeah. So
no, we're going to get our staff in and begin preparing, but it's really going to come down to the governor declaring the day. And so I don't expect it to be for at least a couple of weeks. I'm thinking June 29th-ish. If I were guessing, that would be my best guess.
Yeah. And I know we'll hear more. It's over the weekend, right? Is right. When we're supposed to hear an update.
Right. And we're watching numbers, and whatever we do come late fall, we could be looking at a closure all over again. So
yeah. And Nola, what is the reopening standards meant for you? How are you approaching that as you've taken a look at them and started to sift through? Because I'm with you, Suzanne. They're daunting. I looked at them before this call, and I was trying to prepare, and going, I'm leaning on you all because I have no idea. This is really complex stuff.
Well, I have read them twice so far, and I feel like there's still a lot I feel that some of the requirements are up for interpretation still. They don't feel completely clear to me. And then there are other things where they feel so procedural that I know that they did have early childhood educators who helped them with the requirements, but I do still feel concerned for the children. When you're talking about removing all water play, sand play, pretend food, and the list goes on. I did feel moments where I felt concern. I think it is doable for me, and I agree with Suzanne about kind of a late June, early July as the earliest possible time I would be able to reopen. One thing I think I am lucky in my situation at this time is that because I have such a small program, parents do feel a little bit more trustful and confident about sending their kids back in, because maybe it's only 4 or 5 other families that they're coming into contact with, and it's in my home. So from what I've been hearing from the parents, they feel like, okay, this is possible, but there's additional challenges with having the program in my home. Certain things that would be easy maybe in a school have one exit that's only for children to leave if they're sick. I don't have that. I have 2 exits and neither of them would really fit that. So it's just talking through it with the licensor and getting creative about how to make these work for a family child care setting. But we can make it happen.
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing out what doesn't fit too when it comes to a home care center. That is really a whole other set of criteria that really would need to be applied. That'd be very difficult to take what's in there and apply it to that. I see what you're saying completely. And Stacie, how about you? What are your thoughts? And I know you've got the current program for emergency care, and how is it going with the analysis of these new guidelines for the regular care?
Well, first of all, I love the last thing that Nola said about creative interpretation and working with your licensor. I think that is key. The squeaker in the background is the 9-month-old puppy. So sorry about that. It's playtime because it's 4 o'clock. It seems to be, he knows this every day. So the biggest thing I would say, I probably want to come at this from a slightly different tact, because we work so closely with EEC on a policy level, the Ys collectively across the state, in influencing policy and regulation and decision and all of that. I mean, we have 4 paid staff that work for a public policy organization just representing YMCAs, and a lot of their work focuses on early childhood and school-age childcare and out-of-school time programs. And every regulation that impacts them. And there's a lot, it's not just EEC, it's, labor laws, you name it. So we are actually pushing back. So, we look at this and we say, to not sound, too crazy off the deep end here, I try to be a moderate person. And when you look at some of the expectations on this list, they are illogically irrational and impossible to be compliant with. And so we really are going to try to continue to work. And we did spend a lot of time informing, EEC, how are we doing it in ER childcare? I mean, they whipped together regulations in 36 hours and bam, had them out there for us to, open emergency childcare. And guess what? It's working. There's been very, very, very few across the state infections of staff and children. And so what they did in a very short order of time to make some semblance of safety and minimize risk for children and staff, it was pretty darn good. By following a lot of what the CDC's recommendations are, which is really, it's that baseline. And then, all right, now how do you layer on caring for children on top of that? So, but I do think a lot of it boils back to those 4 very simple things: cover your face, wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart, right? And stay home when you're sick. I mean, if you can do those 4 things, all this minutia of 37 pages of layered on additional regulations that I question some of them are going to be impossible to actually implement. And so really what we're doing right now, Lauren, is to take a look at what do we think is realistic, and think about, as Ys have tons of resources. Nola, you're doing this as a one-man show. And so, in public schools, you have all these wonderful resources. How does everybody make it work? And if we, the Y, are saying, this is crazy, then I implore the 2 of you to not just take it, be a part of the, feeling that you can voice to the licensor or the powers that be, that there has to be a give and take, and we have to try. I'm all for trying. I'm never one to say, oh, it can't be done. Let's try it. But I just can't wait to see how we try changing a baby's clothes every time they drool, and how many outfits they're going to have in a day. You know, we've already had some parents say, I don't even have enough clothes to send to you, you know, for how much baby changing there would have to happen when they soil themselves, you know. So things like that, you know, we're really going to take a look at it and push back on the things that we think need to have more flexibility in them, because that's reality. And this is still going to be trying to operate programs and services in realistic situations. I get it. They have the best intentions. And I would love to layer on more and more, you know, specific details of best intentions. But myself as a person, I'm out there looking at, I run into Stop and Shop to get something, and even their own employees aren't following the one way in the aisles thing, you know, to restock the shelves, or you go touch the keypad that they've put this nasty plastic thing on that's now even dirtier than the keypad was before because they don't change it, right? So there's all of these things that are the best intentions, but then in practicality, in the real world, they become laughable. And that's not how this should be when we're talking about serving children and families. Nobody should be tossing up their hands and saying, this is ridiculous. They should be saying, I can do this, and I know I can commit to it, and I really think I can make it happen. And I think that's really where we will stand as a Y.
I like it. So illogical, irrational, and impossible, the 3 I's. But my favorite word was Nola's, which was subject to interpretation.
Yes.
Right?
Creativity.
Creative.
Now
Yeah.
you have your own new standards.
There
It
you
sounds
go.
like with
There you go.
the 4 I's.
The 4
Well,
I's.
In that spirit of finding your voice to speak up about what's going to work and what may not, I want to do a little quick fire just around all of you. If you could say one thing to the local and state policymakers about childcare in our region, what would it be?
Talk to Stacie. Oops, sorry.
Great. That's your one thing, Suzanne?
That's my one thing. Stacie, are you game? But they need to talk. They need to talk to the providers. They need a much more realistic perspective of what it's like to work with children all day, every day. They need the voice from the field. That's what I would say.
Yeah. How about you, Nola?
I think that even before COVID-19, the system was broken. I love to hear that there is a universal daycare in Provincetown. It makes me so happy, and to have the YMCA, but for so many parents, childcare is not affordable, and parents have to choose between working and paying for childcare, or working and having all of their money go to childcare. And meanwhile, family childcare providers are not becoming rich off of this. They're also like, I'm earning so much less than I was as a teacher and without benefits, and the system is just not working. So even before COVID, the state needs to be subsidizing this care, because it's just not working for families or for providers. And yeah, that's about it.
Powerful.
Yeah, it is. And I think it can't be driven home enough. The economic impact of that, when you have a region where we know wages are lower than the median wage for the state, cost of living is already higher, is higher on average, and then you throw childcare into that mix. And, you know, if you're looking at $20,000 a month, or I'm sorry, $20,000 a year. Woo, no, not that bad, but it is bad. $20,000 a year for one child. And then in the summer, if you have school-age children, keep it going up. It's going to be $600 a week, you know, to keep a kid in not full-time care. So this is, you're right, Nola. It's broken. It's in a crisis state, and it needed attention 2 years ago, before even this happened. And so we are hopefully in a point where, as you all have pointed out, maybe this will bring a much needed spotlight to that, and we can start to have some conversations about what this looks like after, and how we keep the things that are working about this, like subsidy funding and that such thing. So Stacie, I'm gonna give it to you now. What would you say?
I say what Nola said. Fund early education. Fund it with taxpayer dollars. Make this essential need possible for everyone who has children.
And it goes to our core values as a culture, as a country, as a community. Really, are we devaluing the work of women? There's a question for us for the next time. But isn't childcare and premier childcare a core value? Don't we want to give our kids the best launch that we can give them? So yes, Nola, you nailed it. The issue around childcare existed, and COVID has just brought it to a new level, and maybe put a very important light on it for our policymakers to be considering and our politicians to be considering.
You know, I think about school readiness, and I'm really worried that there will be less usage of early childhood programs because of the unprecedented unemployment. And so an unintended consequence of people not needing childcare because somebody is unemployed. And looking at that further down the line, Suzanne, what will the kindergartner look like that may have gone to an early education program from birth to 5 years of age, and they don't go anymore for a few years? Maybe it's 2 years before that family gets employed. Maybe it's 3 years.
Yeah.
And they've missed all of that critical early learning in a group setting. And the curriculum, I mean, this is what early education has stopped being called childcare. It has stopped being called daycare, because there is so much more information now out there about how it is early education and what children need to learn. And I could go on and on about this topic, but I'm really worried for the vulnerable population, the low income populations, right? Where families don't have their own aptitudes to be able to homeschool children. Look at families trying right now who are lawyers and doctors, and, you know, and they're just like going crazy trying to make sure their kids go to their Zoom class.
Right.
So what is it going to be like if the workforce doesn't demand a need for childcare? I just think there are so many down the line unintended consequences of not having the opportunity for it to be free and required, right? You have to go to kindergarten, you have to go to infant care, because this could change, the landscape could change forever as a result of this.
And we have to talk about the impact on the workforce, which you mentioned, Stacie, and our local economy, which is that, you know, and Nola, you put it very well when you said that there are families that are having to make those choices already. And I think that COVID-19 has really amplified and accelerated that process for many families, where if one caregiver is out of work, or if you have a single parent home and you're now having to make a choice about who's re-entering the workforce, who's going to not go back to work, and what does that mean for our local economy and our businesses, and furthermore for young people who want to make a career here. We have to remove those barriers, and one way of doing that, as you said, Stacie, is to make this free. And I think that the cost benefit analysis that families have to do would change dramatically, because that's really what it comes down to. How much does it cost me, and what is the benefit that I'm getting out of this? And if the numbers don't add up, then families won't do it. And I think that the consequences of that, as you said, are far reaching and bigger than right now. They're going to go long term, and our economy here on the Cape needs these workers to stay in the workforce and advance their careers here. So turning to the families and the young people of the Cape, we're going to wrap up here. We've got about 5 minutes. And I just want to end on a note of speaking directly to our young workforce community and our young families. If you say something to them right now, let's end it on a note of hope. I want to make sure that there are a lot of challenges that we're facing as a community and that individual families are facing right now. What would you say to them? How about we start with Nola? Put you on the spot.
Always happens. Don't forget, I forget to unmute myself. I think first of all, I would say that no matter how they are feeling about how the last couple months have gone, they have done a really good job with their kids. It's really hard to work and to take care of them and just, to make kids go on Zoom to go to school and everything. So I just want to say, like, if you're feeling bad in any way, like, you did a good job. And I also want to say that if the system as it will be moving forward is not working for you in any way, to just talk about it with, friends, other parents, and not just, I really appreciated what Stacey said, and just not just take it sitting down, but really be writing to local representatives, state representatives, and just say, this is not working for me. And hopefully that will affect change.
Awesome. How about you, Stacey?
Well, I just think that young people are our future leadership, and we need them right now to stick with us and to keep going and to persevere in whatever their career paths are. And if they have been part of a difficult decision of not being employed anymore, keep going, keep looking, keep reaching for your goals for yourself and your families. Nobody should be cashing in the towel. This is the time to really, take a real inventory of what's so important to you in your own lives, and just really make sure you do what you love and find that for yourself, and go for it, because we need all of you here.
Awesome. And Suzanne?
That's tough, Lauren. There are a million things I would want to say. I think the most important thing is to frame this pandemic for young families that our most important job is to get our kids to the other side intact. And so keep sheltering them, keep loving them, but be easy on yourself. That I heard this from a good child therapist, and it goes something like, good enough is good enough, right? And if your kid is watching too much TV right now, don't beat yourself up over it. Just make sure it's PBS. They now have 2 channels going for older and younger kids, and there's some really solid programming on there that might buy you some space for your sanity. So self-care, I would say, keep taking good care of yourself. Reach out to others. Reach out to your pediatrician. Reach out to your kid's teacher. We're here for you. We'll be here for you all summer. But let's get to the other side of this together. And then we have to push this to the front, like Provincetown did. And I just need to plug the vision of this community and the support of this community for doing the right thing for our kids and for our workforce. And I think Stacey again said it really well a minute ago. We're way more than daycare. We're an early learning center. We're launching these kids, and our relationship with our families and the parents of these kids really matters. So let us help you right now get to the other side of this. So thanks for the opportunity to be here today, Lauren.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise. And I want to encourage anybody who's interested to check out the websites. We will post or tag when we post this video, each of your organizations, businesses, so that people can find you and learn more about you. And I want to encourage anyone who's feeling that their voice is not being heard to reach out to us at CCYP. We can help you find resources, get connected with people who can help affect this positive change that we've been talking about today. And I hope that this conversation has helped anybody out there who's struggling with this right now. I know there's a lot of you. So thank you all again. And thank you very much to our sponsor for today's session. We have a sponsor, Cape Cod and Islands Association of Realtors, is sponsoring not just this session, but the next two video podcast interviews that we're doing. This is a 3-part series on policy and here on the Cape, and CCYP is going to be focusing this session on childcare. The next one will be on housing, and the next one after that will be about civic engagement. So we will touch very heavily on finding your voice and advocating for yourself, not only if you are a parent or caregiver, but any young people here on the Cape that want to get involved, and we hope that all of you do. So thank you very much again, ladies. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for all you're doing for our community.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Bye, Nola. Bye, Stacy.
Bye. Bye.
Good to meet you both.
You too.